Hi, folks. It's Zoe here, and welcome back to another EDGEy Conversation. I'm really excited today. I've got Adam Cresswell joining us. He is the Executive Director at the Hub Community Network. So an opportunity to hear about the great work that's happening over there. So with that said, Adam, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself and then tell us about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. We were saying just before we went on, I've wanted to talk to Zoe for a while. So eventually, I don't know, Zoe, have you been a guest on this, like back when Carla hosted it, or now? We'll have to
No.
have a time where someone else, me or someone else, can host and you can be a guest because people should know about what you're doing. Because everything I've seen so far, and I only know a little bit, is great. So yeah, it's great. It's an awesome chance just to chat for the first time and share a little bit about what we're doing at the Hub. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm part of the leadership for the Hub Community Network, and we are kind of a grassroots movement of plucky young summer camp, United Church summer camp people. I say young. I'm not that young anymore, but I'm on the other end of like the age median. But we are, a grassroots movement of United Church youth and young adults, primarily located kind of across what we now call Ontario in Turtle Island. And we live to connect young people with the liberating love of Christ and to help empower them to build a more just and inclusive world and a healthy planet. And so we do that in a number of ways. Essentially, we're as our name kind of indicates, we're a network of communities. And so we're kind of a community of communities that particularly in-house includes a home church network, of which we call the sub-hubs. And there are sub-hubs sort of all over Southern Ontario, as well as some online sub-hubs that have people from as far as BC or the Maritimes as well. And they are, for those who don't know kind of what a home church is, it's a little different than just a small group or a Bible study. It's a group that meets regularly to kind of do life together, basically, and to grow in their faith and in serving their neighbor. And so sub-hubs, this network has folks who will gather either locally or kind of through a common affinity online, and they'll do faith formation stuff, they'll do worship nights, they'll do Bible studies, they'll also do relationship building with social stuff, whether that's some sub-hubs have literally written their own murder mystery that they've done together, or going to the trampoline park, or going out to eat. And they also do service projects together. So community service, trying to live into loving their neighbors and neighborhoods. So through that, some sub-hubs have been involved in breakfast programs at local community centers, or food security programs through local churches. Or one sub-hub that just will find things to do. Like there was hate speech on a local skate park, and so on one Sunday they just went and cleaned it off. Another time they built furniture for one of their members who was a single mom and was moving into a new place. So the communities are very organic, and they are really founded on relationships and sharing life together in community. And so that's the sub-hub network. And then we also do large events where we try to kind of gather the network and folks who aren't necessarily connected to a sub-hub, sort of a reverse model of what a lot of churches are, where the main things for a lot of church communities is gathering on Sunday, and then maybe you end up in a small group. A lot of people are in a small group, and we really kind of try to found the experience in those home churches, in doing life together regularly in those small groups. And then we come together as a larger group, particularly because we're spread out kind of all over. And so our large events take the forms of worship services that are at Christmas and Easter, and our mini services, which will focus on sort of a different either justice topic or theological topic. And we also do big regional inter-youth group events that are everything we do is very much in the style of summer camp. But particularly our youth group events are very much in the style of a big giant summer camp game, either outside somewhere in the community or at a church, or sometimes at one of the camps. And so we try to serve youth ministries that are already existing, or churches who maybe don't have youth ministries, but have some youth that are looking for something. And so we put on these big giant game days and gather youth groups together for that as well. And then we also have a podcast of our own as well called the Hubcast, and some other programs that we're running, some mentorship programs and things like that as well too. So essentially, all the stuff we do has been formed out of the desire to see our community flourish and be connected beyond just the summers at camp and beyond just the locations of the summer camps and the time of life when you're at summer camp. Because of course, for most of us who were part of these camps, they were these amazing, singular, powerful experiences and seasons of life where we grew in our faith, where we got to know Christ, where we formed relationships and community that you can not see someone for 12 years and then you see someone you worked at camp with and you could go out for coffee and have the best conversation. And so we recognize that camp is this amazing thing, but because it's only the season of life, could we kind of tap into the energy and the community and sort of the magic of camp and what Holy Spirit does at camp? And could we bring that into the school year? And could we bring that to the age, beyond camp? And could we bring that to our neighborhoods and our living rooms and stuff? And that's where most sub hubs meet, is in living rooms. So that was sort of a little bit of the vision behind it. And also to say, how can we move forward and be more justice rooted, more inclusive? How can we understand the work that the Spirit is doing in bigger and wider ways than what we even learned at camp? So that's a little intro into what the Hub is. And we started in 2015 with just doing a couple worship services, and now fast forward to whatever year we're in. It's hard with COVID to remember, but 2022, and we have 7 or 8 sub hubs all over Southern Ontario and run basically almost monthly events. So yeah, that's the Hub.
I'm so excited by this. And I had no idea it existed. Maybe that's me like being out west. But I'm like, it is so true. There's such a gap when you leave summer camp and you're at that 18, 19 age gap. And then it's like, what do you do all the way up until you're eligible to go to seniors breakfast?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And those are great breakfasts, but as someone who's not a morning person, it just doesn't work for me. But yeah. And particularly some of these experiences at camp are so powerful. And we have folks that work at camp for a number of years, even into their early 20s too, that what really ends up happening is that summer camp kind of becomes their church, like their home church, faith community of faith. And because some people didn't go to a church, or some people went to a church that, as many understandably do struggle with, have maybe up until a youth group age, if they're lucky. And then after that kind of 20 somethings transition, it's hard for a lot of churches, because that time of life is rapidly changing every decade. And so it's hard to know how to minister to that. And so people end up kind of feeling like, wow, this camp community that is my community of faith. So that was a lot of the vision of how can we support that. A lot of what we do is finding ways to support the camps themselves as well, and either connecting people to the camps or to other camps, or through the sub hubs, because there's a fire and a passion in people when they experience it, when they serve kids at camp or serve in any capacity and live in intentional community. And then when it gets taken away, or not when it gets taken away, but when it naturally ends, there's a big gap there that our souls have a hunger to be filled. And so we're seeing what we can do to fill that.
Yeah. And I think your point too, is so salient about what's happening in that demographic. I know that's a thing I'm grappling with my own community too, is 18 to like 45 or whatever. We're always
Yeah.
pushing what our top end is as we get older. We
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
we have to
Yeah.
extend the age.
Weirdly, the age that we serve as our core team gets older seems to keep stretching because we're like, well, we want to still go to this stuff too. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's such an interesting mix because it's like folks who are like finishing high school, they're doing university degrees, and some folks are full on raising their families, have multiple kids
Yeah.
already. Like it's just such a broad demographic to try and support.
Yeah, we often use the words or like the phrase age and stage because you can be in your 30s and still going, I'm still figuring out what I want to do, and I'm still kind of putting down my roots, or I don't know like where I want to live yet, or maybe I don't want to live in one place for the rest of my life. So you can be in your mid 30s and be in that stage, or you can be 23 and be like, I found my work or the place that I love or the neighborhood that I love or a family, and I'm laying down roots now. So that's why it is we say kind of the age range for us is we sort of have two tracks, two streams. One is high school, where like the inter youth group events have, and we have sub hubs that are particularly for high schools, and then we have sort of well, we used to call it 18 to 30, and then we call it 18 to 35. Now we just say 18 plus for the young adults, because yeah, what makes a young adult? I mean, I'm in my mid 30s now, and I still feel like a young adult, and probably by a lot of stretches, I'm not actually under that category. But that is the thing is, I think that's what's so hard for church for traditional kind of communities of faith. I think we want to be able to minister to them. We want to be able to connect, but that, like you said, it's age and stage is not this like linear thing with how old you are, with when your birth year was. So I think that's what makes it particularly hard for kind of the traditional models in the United Church to connect in. And so we really try and we're always learning, and we don't always get it perfect, but we're always really trying to find out how we can stay. I don't necessarily like the word relevant, because sometimes that can be too like moving with the trends of culture that can go any which way, but to be able to resonate with people wherever they're at in that age and stage of young adulthood.
The word I think you used earlier that really struck me was like being organic.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's what's really exciting about, and not just the hub, but other innovative ministries that are happening in the United Church, is there's a recognition, I hope, and I think I see more and more of the value of being able to be organic in structure and in format and spontaneous, and whether that's in the structure of the events that you do or in the community that you lead. It also speaks a lot to how important it is to be able to flatten hierarchy, because hierarchy so often really just ends up as a tool of colonialism and white supremacy. And so being able to not necessarily, we sometimes do struggle when we're trying to forge relationships or kind of do stuff on regional and denominational levels, because we don't always fall into like what's the proper like governance and hierarchy and structure. And although accountability checks are really good, and I love that United Church is a denomination that really always does their best through the structure to try and funnel it back to community leadership and consultation and accountability, but often we end up kind of trapped in structures of hierarchy. And so we do have a core team, and as I said, like I'm in a directing position, but one of the things that we try to do as a team is to understand our roles actually less as leaders and more as those in service or in servanthood of the community. So we, rather than trying to manage things, we ask ourselves, what do we need to do to support this community or these sub-hub leaders right now, or this youth group? What do we need to do to support the community at large was a question that really guided us when COVID hit. And we said, okay, so we were all about for years gathering in person, to a fault. Like we had barely a Facebook page, didn't have a website until we kind of have one now. We have a link tree and a website that we have through a church that's our one of our sponsored churches. But for years, we like did nothing in the digital space because we were all about like, there's so much of that. We want to cultivate in person, which is particularly important for us in community. And then COVID hit and we're like, okay, well, now we have to go completely digital. And I think that guiding question of what do we need to do to support seeing our community and those around us flourish, that helped give us the flexibility to try things and experiment and fail at things, and try things and attempt things from different angles. And that was really important for not just for quote unquote being successful during COVID, although we felt really good about our events and the way we moved the ball forward in justice conversations and in numbers and things like that. But at the end of the day, that we wanted to go back to our mission is to connect people with the liberating love of Christ, and for us to be able to support the flourishing of those in our community. That's we see that as the translation of that mission. And so so that question helped guide us and helps to keep us accountable, to make sure when we get too high on our own ideas or the way we've always done it, which is funny, even when you're only existed for 7 years, we've had moments where we're like, well, why are we doing this? Are we just doing it because we've always done it? And like, we've even gotten trapped in that. So it's very understandable when communities of faith do get trapped into, going and falling in love with model over mission, as some might say. And so we always try and come back to that question. How are we being able to support our community? And in order to do that, we have to be able to stay organic and spontaneous, because we're about people, and people's needs and situations change, and their opportunities to offer things to the community grow and develop. So we want to stay not running ahead of the Spirit or lagging behind. We want to try and do our best to stay in step with the dance that Holy Spirit leads us in.
Wow. This is like, the language in here is so great for me and so rich around like, how do we get out of the trap of being in love with model versus being in love with mission?
Yeah.
I think that, and I think like broadly, the United Church is like, this is a huge question right now in congregations across the country, is like, can we take a step back from model and kind of return to mission and really think about what that means and how we exist in the world?
Yeah. And I think that's critical, because models exist to facilitate, to serve the overall mission. And if your model is working, like, I have to remind myself to not fix what's not broken. Like, if something's going well, like I heard Aaron Niequist once talk about people who or a church community he was with, and he said, to a fault, they were the types that he said, we were the types to never do something the same thing once. So like, always like, well, we always, and I'm like that, like, oh, we got to do this. We got to, because I'm an Enneagram 7, which means I need to have fresh and new and different things happening. So it is important to remind myself, like, when things work, that's great. And ritual is a beautiful thing that is very foundational to church communities, and I think is very lost in our kind of wider culture. So ritual is good, routine can be good, but when it stops working, it can be very hard for us to understand that we need to go back to the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? Is it to and COVID forced us to teach that. Like, for a lot of us, the why would have been, well, we do what would have been mistakenly be, well, we do what we do so that people have butts and seats on Sunday mornings. Well, when they couldn't come to those seats on Sunday mornings, it actually forced us to go back to, oh, well, we want to facilitate, worship and spiritual growth. And I guess that can also happen in different ways. And we're at a point, not just in the United Church, where across the world, we're seeing sort of this, I don't know if it's a moment or not. It might be very like a privileged, I live in my life, so we must be in a special time because I'm here. But it seems like we're living in a particular moment of the church undergoing another kind of metamorphosis and a transformation, as there have been sort of these particular moments through church history where things have had, for good and ill, where things have shifted in a seismic way. And it does kind of feel like we're in that now. And I think with that moment, coming out of sort of the 20th century, and particularly for those of us on Turtle Island, and particularly for those of us in the United Church, which continues to be a predominantly white denomination, we have an opportunity to go, hey, this metamorphosis can actually be a really beautiful and important and necessary thing for us to grow more like, to look more like the face of Christ, and to look more like heaven on earth in our midst. And so we have the opportunity to embrace that, and to Jesus talks about the parable about new wine can't fit in old wineskins because it'll crack. And so the opportunity to embrace new wineskins, to find new models too, like new models will emerge, but to hold loosely what we've hold loosely and gently what we've known, so that we can be led into what's next. And I think if we don't do that, the Spirit will. So we have God's given us the dignity of choice and free will to be left behind if we want to just continue to live in our models. And again, for some that might be okay, and for some church communities and faith communities, it's actually, this is a really scandalous thing to say, it's actually okay to have a point where the life is over. That like a life cycle is intrinsically part of the Christ cycle and the Easter cycle and what our faith is. So that's okay too. It's not saying every church needs to completely throw the book out and figure out how to be innovative and be new, but for those who are expressing a desire to say, well, we want to live into this 21st century, want to live into what the Spirit is doing next, we've got to be able to be organic and hold loosely things, and go back to the why of what we do. And in my privileged and subjective opinion, and I come from a lot of intersections of privilege, so I know it's easy for me to say this, but I just really look at going back to the liberative lens of Jesus. And if we, as our mission, are not connecting into bringing good news to the poor and setting the oppressed free and sight to the blind, and living as a jubilee people, forgiving debts and being just economically, and being part of restoration for the planet, and resisting the demonic forces of white supremacy and colonialism. If we're not living into that, I think we need to go back to really looking at what is the why of being a community of United Church folks, or Christians, or disciples, whatever language you want to put there. And if we can do the hard and courageous work of confronting how we need to change and repent, and the opportunity to be resurrected into something new, what's really excited is completely unknown and amazing things will happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to follow that up, Adam.
I know. Honestly, you can interrupt me more, because I'll just like go and go. And so please interrupt and cut off and redirect, because people should hear more of you rather than me as well.
But I think I think like lots of what you're sharing is what folks are grappling with. Like when I meet with people, when I do Curiosity Cohort, what you've just articulated is really the crux of where folks are at. Like, how do we get back to a place where we remember that death and resurrection are actually part of our story?
Yeah. And like a critical part. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because we do the cycle every year. We go through the Easter season every year, yet for some reason there's this disconnect about like, how do we actually embody that?
Yeah. My a guy that I very much respect and look up to, his name's Daniel Hughes, and he pastors a community called the Cincy Hive in Cincinnati. And he had this line once, I think this was like a year or two ago, where he was talking about kind of this topic, and he was talking about for the communities of faith, the churches that are, and I'll put this in our now context, who are now returning to in person and going, hey, where is everybody? And we count ourselves like among that, like at the Hub, at the other churches that I serve at, where we're like, oh, wow, like people are just reflexively coming back, which like shouldn't have surprised us. But Dan Hughes would talk about like, we have to confront the question that a little concert and a TED Talk might not be us fulfilling the mission of what we're supposed to do. Doesn't mean worship together isn't important and powerful, and it doesn't mean that like I love a good sermon. Like I'm a podcast guy, so I love listening to a talk. I love listening to a good sermon, but for those of us who have understood what we do as Sunday mornings where those things take place, we've got to be able to like step back and see it in a bigger way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I was in a staff meeting this week, and we were having some reflection around what's happened in Uvalde, Texas, around the mass shooting. And one of the things that someone said was like, prayers actually have to change the prayers,
Yeah.
And move us into action. So I think this is the crux of where we're at right now. Is like we've done, and this is maybe this like precipice of like, are we in this moment of big shift around what it means to be disciples, Christians, people of faith in this moment, and how are we moving it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really wise to be able to start to confront that question, and the guardrails that I see that are important for that are it's very easy as me, as someone who is very like action based and like wanting to see things happen, and believing with all my heart that to be a disciple is naturally to be an activist in some way, shape, or form. There's a million ways to be that, but yes, that we need to be led to action. It's easy for me to have the pendulum swing so hard that actually ends up. We have to be careful not to end up back into like the sin of capitalist hustle culture, where it's all about, okay, what am I doing and how am I hustling? Because there's something really critical about what our faith offers us in reflection and stillness and contemplation as well, and particularly how we can access that through the many ways that we can connect and commune through prayer. So I think that we need like both of those things. For those of us who are who lean towards that way of moments of liturgy and loving your seat in church. And I know like I'm gonna give a nice hot take. I know there's people who and I was one of them, was like, why do we always have to sit here? Like as a kid, and my family was like, well, this is where we sit, and like you can't sit over there because that's where like Dorothy sits. So I know we can get very wrapped up in critiquing that, but at the same time, I actually love for the people who, I have a lot of love for the people who like, this is their spot and they have a ritual and they have a routine and they lean into that, because capitalist culture does not make a lot of space for that. So I have a lot of love for that. But for those who lean that way, yeah, I want to see those people encouraged to go, how are we then getting up on, how are we praying with our feet, with our vote, with our opportunity to engage with our neighbors? And for those us who lean the way of we've got to be doers, how are we continuing to make time for our souls to be formed, to be still and not given to the lie that the world rises and falls depending on us? How can we lean into a kind of a both and there, and make time for hearts to be continually formed to sustain us for the journey of unrelenting action towards a more just and inclusive world?
Yeah. And this is the mindset shift that I've been thinking about a lot lately, is like, how do we shift out of either or into both and? And both and is really what's going to help us move forward, holding these two things at once, which we are shockingly not really good at, holding two things at once.
Yeah, in a world where we can have like, I literally have a computer in the palm of my hand as I sit and talk to you on a computer with like, I don't know, 20. How many tabs? Let me count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm counting how many tabs I have open. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. I have 24 tabs open. And on my phone, I'm never going to read them. My phone has 150 million tabs from like 5 years. So we're kind of get convinced by technology and again by our society that we can hold all these things. But when we're talking what you're talking about, but really being able to be able to embrace ambiguity and tension, and a lot of our faith is about embracing paradox. Like how does God come as fully human and fully God, like in embracing then the paradox of death and resurrection and life beyond death, and so that's a really hard thing to do, but it's like, I don't know, I think when we can lean into it, it's like a really good like physical, mental, emotional, spiritual workout where it's like so stretching, but afterwards you're like, wow, that was really good. Like that I feel good after that stretching. And I think our churches and individuals need to be stretched to go beyond where we're at, not because where we were at is bad, but because I think the Spirit has more, and the Spirit is inviting us deeper and further in, and lower down. A lot of following Jesus as the path of descent, right? It's not about climbing the ladder, it's actually about descending it. And so to be able to descend deeper down into the heart of love and justice and liberation for ourselves and those around us is it's challenging work. It's challenging to do it as an individual. It's even more challenging, I think, to do it as a community. But it's really critical that we can do that, because our hearts and our neighborhoods need flourishing and transformation. I mean, you mentioned Uvalde, and there's so many things going on right now where we look around and just go, do we really have to settle for the way it is? And I think it's really easy, particularly as someone who definitely identifies as much closer to like the end of like the liberal end of like the political spectrum. It's really easy, I think, in those communities for us to give into the kind of cynicism and despair. And I think the opportunity to share this and to hold this as disciples, as people who follow the Spirit's lead, and who follow this dark-skinned revolutionary who was executed by a violent state and beat them through the power of nonviolence. It's really important for us to be able to say, actually, there is hope, and actually there is opportunity, and there is possibility. And we don't do that through ignoring the struggle, but actually looking it dead in the eye and being willing not to blink and not to move, and to say, we can write a better story. We can actually have better neighborhoods. We can actually have more flourishing for those who are under the boot of oppression. We don't have to actually accept, in our part of Turtle Island, we can now call Canada, we don't have to accept the status quo that has led to like this housing crisis and this food insecurity and housing insecurity crisis. And we have the opportunity to share that good news with people, and to be part of seeing things like that happen. And I think at the Hub, we're something I share with when I'm meeting people or other folks who like me have been very formed by different intersectional liberation theology. A lot of our goal is, how do we keep the kids radical? How do we not just end up as having like as so many of us as just being going along the status quo route of kind of being passionate about, because so many teenagers are passionate about changing the world and seeing things different, and then just the ebb and flow of regular life, the thickness of the air as you get older, that you just settle into, as long as I have like a really good like pension fund, and as long as I have a really like the perfect place to live, and as long as I have like the boat and the cottage and stuff like that. And I love a good cottage, so not that those are inherently bad things, but how do we keep ourselves radical enough to want to continue to put the mission that Jesus puts before us, of bringing good news to the poor, of restored neighbors and neighborhoods and souls and the earth itself. How do we keep that front and center with people? How do we stay radical for the flourishing and liberation of people and the life? I don't actually have the answers to those things. That's just what we're trying little by little to be able to do through doing ridiculous big giant fun games days in the middle of churches, and doing worship services, and having people share meals together and share discussion together, because I think it's the opportunity that we have as people of faith, and not just as young people, to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm like I feel like you and I could talk for hours probably.
I think so. Yeah, I did. I looked down. I was like, wow, we've been talking for a long time. It feels like
I'm conscious that there's some people who are going to be watching this recording back, and their brains are going to be exploding at this point. They're going to be furiously writing notes.
Well, that's good about the recording. They can go back or they can email me.
So I mean, I'll shift us towards closing our conversation, but I'm I'm like, which question do I want to know the answer to most? Because I've got lots to know. But I think for me, like hearing everything you've shared today, what are you most hopeful for about the future? Knowing that we can't really predict where things will go, we're open to where the Spirit might lead us. But what are you most hopeful for feeling into that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not trying to contradict myself here, but maybe just more confess that I'm as much talking to myself in things like this than anyone. Like because I do feel so much of the pull towards hopelessness and despair when you look at like the Herculean task in front of us, like just looking at the climate crisis, or just looking at the housing crisis, and just looking at the need to decolonize what we do, and it's particularly in this country, and just going, wow, how are we going to get there? So I so empathize with how easy it is to fall into there, and I think that what I'm most hopeful for is that even though it is so illogical, and it doesn't come from like an empirical, rational place, I just do firmly believe that that Creator is restoring all things, and is reconciling all things to themselves. And so I guess I'm hopeful. Maybe I'll use the word, I'm excited to see how it actually happens, because you look at it's like looking at at any really good story, and it's any really good story right before the end, it looks like the bleakest, and you're like, wow, how are they gonna like turn it around? Like, how are they gonna get out of this? And so much of it looks like that right now. I do very much agree that so much of the state of our world, and it just looks so like I don't even know where to begin. Like we have an election in Ontario coming up. I'm not hopeful about it. I'm gonna cast my vote, but I'm not hopeful about the results from what I've read so far and what I see. But I continue to be I firmly believe that the vision that Jesus casts for the world is, if we could live into that, we would see this world look more like paradise, look more like heaven on earth. So I continue to be hopeful that even if I don't see in my lifetime or in my tenure here, even if I don't see all of the things restored, liberated, healed, that I want to see, I take hope in the fact that work was done before I was here, long before I was here, and work will continue to be done after I am here. And so I'm particularly hopeful because, as I said, I'm at the older end of the spectrum of where the hub kind of operates. And so every year, as we see new youth and young adults come through our community, or come to our community and then go out, I just see more and more evidence of really incredible things happening through them, through the young people in our community, whether they're in leadership or just participate as sub-hub or come to our events or play in the band. So I'm very hopeful when I look at the changes that we've seen even within our community in the last few years through the work of the grassroots work of people. And I just, in our context, the positive, the change, the transformation, the restoration, the healing, the love, the goodness has so far outweighed the challenge. And the challenges have been there for sure. But the goodness has just so outweighed it. So I just get continually hopeful when I am connected in with the firm conviction that Creator is working, even when I don't see it, which is good because it's not about me. And when I look at the folks, the teens and the 20 somethings, the young adults and the 30 somethings in the Hub Community Network, when I see the lives they're leading and the change that they're making in their schools and their workplaces and their camps and their neighborhoods and their churches. It's just ridiculous how much good stuff is happening. And that's just the hub. And so I know that it's also happening beyond our community as well. So yeah, that's a very long-winded answer to say the spirit and people around me continue to make me very hopeful.
Really cool. Yeah, I am like you, I'm really inspired by what younger generations are doing, and their commitment to radical love, radical justice is really, if there's anything for me to be hopeful about, I think that is where some of it lies for me, seeing in the ways in which that they are working and moving in this world is really inspiring. If folks want to know more about the hub, if they want to be part of a sub hub, how do they do it? How do they get in touch? I'm asking as much for myself as I am for everyone else.
Yeah, perfect. And like I said, we didn't have this stuff for years, but now we kind of do. So we have, so there's kind of two main places if you have an internet connection. We have a link tree, which is linktree/the hub community, THEHUBCOMMUNITY. And we also have a website through our grandparent church, Trinity United Church Kitchener, who helps kind of support us in a kind of a mentorship role. At their website, we have our pages on their website as well, which is trinityunitedkw.ca. And then there'll be a drop-down menu that says the hub, or you can go to trinityunitedkw.ca about the hub. And I confess that we've just got the stuff up and running. We have actually a lot of work to do to make it more accessible for folks with disabilities. So we're hard at work on that. So if either of those don't work, you can also email our team at hubleadership@gmail.com, hubleadership@gmail.com. And we'd love to know how we can support and serve and connect you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Adam. I imagine that we will maybe have you back for yet another edgy conversation sometime.
Sure. This was great. Yeah. And like I said, we need to have you in the hot seat to hear more from Zoe. That's what the people want to hear. That's what the people need to hear.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for your time, and we'll have to chat. We'll see if we can set up a swap day. You can be in the interviewing chair.
Sure. Yeah.
But it was so great. Thanks everyone for joining us for this edgy conversation. As always, the links to find more information about the hub and how to connect in with them will be in the drop-down box below. And you can reach out to the Edge team if you've got any questions. Thanks so much. Take care.